So my view of my favourite poems changes, but on the sort of short list, those that would always come up, one would be Thomas Hardy's poem Drummer Hodge. One would be Wilfred Owen's Anthem for Doomed Youth. And to take a modern one would be a poem by a poet that I suspect no one who sees this video will have heard of, called Jon Balaban, who was an American who was, I suppose he was a conscientious objector, but he so disapproved of his country's war that he went to Vietnam to run an orphanage for the orphans that his country had made. And he ran an orphanage in Vietnam, stayed there after the war, learnt Vietnamese, and wrote some very powerful poems. And one I would like to choose is one called In Celebration of Spring, which is written after the war, my point about the good poems coming late, because he knows what's happening, he's seen the battlefields, he's met the people, he writes with authority. It is perfectly possible to go to a war not as a fighting soldier. You can be a medic, you can be a stretcher bearer. And one of the things I think is interesting, that so many poets have pleaded their deep commitment, deep engagement, their horror at Vietnam, or Afghanistan, or Iraq. None of them actually cared to go. They thought it was better to stay in Kensington and write poems that they got from newspapers or television. Jon Balaban cared so much, he went and he ran an orphanage, which seems to me a very proper thing to do, and it certainly produced some proper poems. Just one other thing to say, that Hardy, of course, was writing his poem Drummer Hodge. It's about the South African War, and he never went to the South African War. But Drummer Hodge is a sort of Dorset name, and he had lived his life among people like the drummer he imagines, who had just been killed in South Africa and buried in South Africa. So his lifetime involvement in, investment in country people, English country people, enables him to imagine his way into that poem, as half the people who write poems about whatever the war might be. I know when I used to work for AUP, and when a war started, my desk was always flooded with hundreds of poems about whatever the war was, most of them dreadful. But Thomas Hardy and Tennyson in the charge of the Light Brigade, they had a lifetime commitment to what they were writing about, so they write poems of real authority. And Owen, of course, saw what was happening, wrote about it wonderfully. Balaban went not to fight, but to bear witness, and his witness, I think, would stand with Hardy and with Wilfred Owen.